From the low desert in beautiful Tempe, Arizona, this is Politics in the Past with Robert Ferguson. And joining me today is one of our Gen Z roundtable contributors, participants, consigliaries or something. I don't know. Uh, this is Jack Hinrichs, who is who's done some work here at the Center for American Institutions and is a student here at Arizona State University. Jack, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a proud consigliere, I would say. Yeah, I've been working at the Center for American Institutions for about a year now, just short of a year, I suppose, doing research and communications work. I also am on the executive board of the center's affiliated club, the Politics and Leadership Club. I'm going to be leading a conversation today, actually, about loneliness amongst Gen Z and how we can combat that and why that is happening. We'll all be discussing little platoons, of course.
For those of you, that is a callback to our Gen Z roundtable episode where Jack kept insisting that the solution to everything are what Edmund Burke called little platoons. We don't need to go into that. If you're interested, you need to go back, download, listen to that episode,
And then come back here.
and then come back here. And we'll let you stop.
Uh-huh.
Okay, welcome back.
Amazing. And wasn't Jake counted, and I said it 4 times. I talked about little platoons 4 times, which frankly wasn't enough.
Well, here's the thing. We're going to have another whole conversation today, so maybe you'll have another chance to bring it in.
I'm really good at bringing it up.
You know what? We all have to have a little bit of expertise in our lives. Right?
Absolutely.
A little something. So this is we're recording this on a Monday. Usually we like to record this podcast last week. Jack and I had a little bit of technical difficulties last night when we were trying to record this. I was in my car trying to make this work, and trying to get away from my kids in an audio environment that might make sense. And Jack was patient enough while the audio just didn't never quite lined up.
No, that's life.
That's yeah. You wait till you got 2 little kids running around and they're screaming at you and demanding your attention while you're like, "Daddy's trying to do a work call."
Is that not conducive for a podcast recording?
You know what?
Is that not recommended by podcast experts?
It might be. It might be recommended by religious experts. I don't know, but. Anyway, so today's episode, Jack is from the bustling state of South Dakota. And I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. So I have been obsessed with politics most of my life. Not necessarily obsessed like an obsessed ideologue or partisan or anything like that. I just love studying politics. I love how it operates in various jurisdictions, various venues, and I love going down rabbit holes to find out how the political situation in various exotic locales. And I was the I the other night I was up late. My kids had finally gone to bed and I was watching New Mexico, Nevada college football.
Yeah.
And for those who don't follow college football, that is not must-watch TV for anybody.
No.
I mean, not even must-watch TV for the friends and family of the people playing in that game.
Absolutely not.
2 poor teams playing really late at night. And New Mexico's not as poor, but either way, it's not must-watch TV. And I thought the only person who could be caught being engaged in this game, other than serious gamblers, is a college football sicko like myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so but I also have the same feeling about my interest in politics. I am I will go on a deep dive into Ecuadorian politics because I'm curious.
Yeah.
Right. And I know, Jack, you're a little bit of the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, this might be a feature we get going. But I wanted to bring Jack on because I am really curious about South Dakota politics. And I can guarantee you are not going to hear very much about the inner workings of South Dakota politics if you watch CNN or you go to any other podcast, other than maybe if there's a very specialized Sioux Falls politics podcast out there.
There's one that I'm aware of. But you know what? I'm just going to go out there and say that we have a fighting chance at being the #1 South Dakota-based politics podcast
This
in the nation.
this will be your one-stop shop for South Dakota politics,
Mhm.
if you are curious.
Absolutely.
So, I'm gonna let you, give me a long introduction to South Dakota politics here in a moment, but I'm just gonna start by saying to our listeners, South Dakota might be the most Republican state in the United States.
Yeah. It's up there.
If you and I don't just mean it's the most conservative. What I mean is it's the most Republican. Jack, do you know how many times South Dakota has voted for the Democratic nominee for president?
I think the number is 3.
It's 3. Can you give me the years?
It voted, I don't know the years, I know the candidates. It voted for Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964,
Yep.
and it voted for FDR in 32 and 36.
Yep. If I had money to offer, you would get it.
Amazing.
And the thing is those are the 3 elections. Those are the biggest 3 Democratic victories of the 20th century.
Yes.
So the fact is that South Dakota only voted for the Democratic nominee for president in times when the Republican Party was being totally wiped out.
Yeah. At times when people questioned whether the Republican Party would survive after that election.
Right. That's a good way of putting it. That's a really good way of putting it. And so this goes back to, now that they also voted for the Progressive Party in 1912, which was Teddy Roosevelt's party, which was the Republican Party offshoot. But basically, they voted Republican ever since they became a state, and at the presidential level. And what year did they become a state?
They became a state in 1881, I believe.
Okay, so for 150 years,
Yep.
this might be the most historically Republican state you can find. I did intend to look it up to see if there was one that had voted Republican more consistently,
Yeah.
but I don't actually think there is one.
And it extends to the statewide level. South Dakota has not had a Democratic governor since 1979, which is the longest streak in the nation. That like the Republican dominance over the South Dakota governorship for 50 years is the longest streak in the nation.
Interesting. And I also know, because I Wikipedia'd this, that the Republican Party has had a supermajority of the legislature since 1976.
Absolutely.
There are currently, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think there's 105 seats between the state house and the state senate.
Yep, there are 70 state house seats and 35 state senate seats, 7 of which are controlled by Democrats.
Right. So that means that there are 98 Republicans.
Correct.
And 7 Democrats.
Yep.
So I don't doubt that South Dakota is a very conservative place.
Uh-huh.
But I wanted to go back to this notion of South Dakota being the most Republican state. Because if we look back in history, the Republican Party has not always been a conservative party. The Republican Party that South Dakota was voting for in the even the 1950s or the 1920s or the 19-teens or the 1900s or the 1890s was conservative from a certain perspective, but not the type of conservative that sort of would determine that this state would still be conservative. So the South Dakota has kind of been at the center of the National Republican Party.
Absolutely.
For 140 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's amazing to me. You know, because if we look at its peer group, North Dakota does not have that same experience.
And this is when I'd like to ding North Dakota. North Dakota has very little experience and very little going for it. There's a very good reason why this podcast isn't about North Dakota politics.
Well, that's true. I mean, North Dakota, I've driven through North Dakota many times. I love you if you're from North Dakota. I do love Fargo. I've been to some North Dakota State hockey games. Big fan. But yeah, South Dakota does seem a little more interesting, at least when you're driving through it. Though maybe I need to bring on a North Dakota person to be able to.
I don't think you do. I just want to state for the record that Rob said all of those good things about North Dakota and not me. I just want that on the record.
Well, fair enough. But okay, so but I think if you look at South Dakota's peer group of
Mhm.
states, and I'm using peer group loosely because of sort of the regional area, there, Montana, for instance,
Mhm.
has a very robust state Democratic Party, at least historically. It might not today, but until very recently it
Mhm.
did. I really and I don't think you can find a state, maybe Rhode Island,
Mhm.
that has that same experience as a Democratic stronghold.
Yeah. Mhm.
The only one I can think of might be Rhode Island, that I have to check into it, but I bet you it is not as powerful or as historic.
No, Rhode Island had a far stronger progressive Republican wing.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it might be the closest thing to a true one party state
Mhm.
in the United States,
Yeah.
South Dakota.
Mhm.
And that's fascinating. It's particularly difficult if you're a Democrat in South Dakota.
You don't say. It is fascinating and confusing and debilitating all at once. Yeah.
I do understand that. I lived in Alberta, Canada for a long time, which was another one party state
Mhm.
for a while. And the opposition party, it was a really big election one time when they won 4 seats.
Yeah. Mhm.
And the way that they put it was, the phone booth got a little bigger.
Yep. Mhm. That's the running joke amongst the South Dakota Legislative Caucus in the Senate is that they can caucus in a two-door coupe. Mhm.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But okay, so can you give me a little bit of an introduction to maybe contemporary South Dakota politics, and then maybe we can move back from there?
Certainly. The most important thing to know about contemporary South Dakota politics, or South Dakota, period, is that it's tiny. There are just under 900,000 people who live in the entire state. So everybody knows everybody, particularly when you get to sort of the elite or the political elites, the decision-making level. Everybody knows everybody. And so that lends a certain uh, personality to South Dakota, where it's hard to be truly offensive or horrible in your politics because the people you're fighting against, um, you all know them on a deeply personal level. You've all spent a great deal of time to them. Chances are your dads knew one another, your moms knew one another, you went to college together, one of your cousins is married to one of their cousins. It's super interrelated. And that is the most important thing to understand about South Dakota politics. The second most important thing to know about South Dakota politics is that the state is really divided into two states. So you've got East River. The Missouri River runs through the center of the state. You've got East River, which is a very different geographic and cultural region than West River. East River has a lot of agriculture, a lot of farming for soybeans and corn, predominantly for ethanol. That's where the bulk of the state's population is. That's where Sioux Falls, which has about 300,000 people in its metro, the state's largest city by far is. The other state's largest cities, with the exception of Rapid City, are almost all East River. And it is comparatively a more liberal place than West River. Historically, you would have things like the Farmers Union and other progressive agrarian organizations who could make some ground up in East River amongst small farmers. West River is totally different. It's not farmers, it's ranchers. And if you've ever spent any time in a Western state or in the Midwest, you understand that's very different. People are so much more spread out. West River has a population density that's absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing there. Basically, the spot in the continental United States that is furthest away from a McDonald's is in West River, South Dakota. It's in Perkins County, and it's about 100 miles as the crow flies to a McDonald's. And so also West River, you have a higher population of Native Americans on reservations. There are some East River, but the reservations really pick up once you get West River. And the poverty on the Native American reservations, West River, is abhorrent. It's startling. The poorest zip code in terms of average annual income per capita in the United States of America is between Allen and Kyle, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Reservation. The poorest is in South Dakota on the reservation. And so when you're looking at South Dakota politics, it's essential to understand first that it's an incredibly small state and everybody knows everybody. And second, that really, in effect, it's two cultural regions, East River and West River. And within that West River cultural region, particularly, there is a separate area of the res.
Fair enough. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, are the reservations in West River, are they relatively contiguous or are they spread out?
They're reasonably contiguous. There's two. There's the Pine Ridge and the Rosebud that are in the south, and then there's one up north, and you sort of have the interstate that runs in between the two.
Mm,
The interstate running from Sioux Falls to the Black Hills. But it's they sort of on the very southern border of the state and the very northern border of the state.
okay, so that also from a political perspective, if you're trying to join them together, kind of makes
Mhm.
it difficult.
Absolutely. You've got to run through Jones County. So the reservations, and this has changed somewhat in very recent history, but they're generally very democratic places. Um, but in between the the reservations in the south and the reservations in the north, you have some of the most conservative country, white ranching country in the nation. Jones County, South Dakota, voted probably 80% for Donald Trump, and that's on the low end. And then in West River, South Dakota, Harding County, South Dakota, which is in this extreme northwest corner, had more votes for Gary Johnson in 2016 than it did for Hillary Clinton.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So, but I'm also assuming that the power of the state legislature, the
Mhm.
political power of the state, just because of how populations work,
Yeah.
is East River.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the West River folks, they really resent that fact. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you talk about the difference between ranching and farming.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're a rancher, you've got very different material needs
Mhm.
than if you're a farmer.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I suspect, especially when it comes to land use, environmental regulation, that
Mhm.
kind of thing, there's probably big debates,
Mhm. Yeah.
even within the Republican Party of South Dakota.
Yeah. Oh, the Republican Party in South Dakota, and I'm happy you brought that up because this is another fascinating split, is these days really split into two groups. You have the establishment Republican Party, which is predominant in the Sioux Falls area, that's made up of fiscal conservatives, Ronald Reagan, George Bush types, who believe very deeply in small government, low taxes, your standard traditional Republican fare. And then out once you get to the more rural areas of South Dakota, you have there's a state freedom caucus that is comprised of devoutly MAGA individuals who follow like that party line, take their MAGA as straight as they take their whiskey, and they do not play well with the establishment Republicans at all.
Yeah.
And the split between the establishment Republicans and the Freedom Caucus MAGA types is in many ways in South Dakota politics more important than the split between Democrats and Republicans.
Well, that's what I was going to dive into is
Mhm.
that, again, in my experience in places where there's one dominant party, that never stops people from disagreeing with each other.
Oh, absolutely.
It just means that the disagreement is held under one banner
Mhm.
rather than two banners.
Yes. Mhm.
So that's interesting. So you have this professional class of Republicans
Mhm. Yep.
that are probably to some degree feel like they are entitled to control the Republican apparatus of the state
I would say that's fair.
and are accustomed to it.
Mhm. Certainly.
And then you have a more populist,
Yes.
rural grouping. I don't, they're obviously not all in the caucus, but
Mhm.
the grouping that resents that.
Yes.
Not only do they, whether they resent the policies or not is sort of maybe a little bit separate.
Mhm.
But what they really resent is the expectation that the Sioux Falls Republican professional class gets to determine the trajectory of the party.
Absolutely. There is a certain arrogance amongst the Sioux Falls Republican gentry, you might call it, that
I'm assuming a lot of lawyers.
it's quite a few lawyers. The South Dakota State Bar is surprisingly liberal, but it's a fair number of lawyers, a lot of bankers, a lot of insurance types, because South Dakota is such a haven for the banking industry.
Okay, can
Because
you explain that?
yeah, so there was a governor named William Janklow, who served 16 years as South Dakota's governor in two separate stints. And he saw that the population of Sioux Falls in South Dakota was really stagnating. And so he was looking for a way to spur some economic growth. And he hit upon the idea of super predatory credit cards. And so essentially, South Dakota in the 90s got rid of their usury laws. And so a credit card issued in South Dakota could have super high interest rates. And so then all of these banks started saying, man, if we headquartered in South Dakota, the interest rate on our credit cards could go through the roof. And so, like, US Bank has a huge presence in Sioux Falls. And all of these other banks have a huge presence in Sioux Falls. And it's created a massive banking industry in South Dakota in particular. Also, South Dakota has basically no financial transparency laws. Like, money you park in South Dakota is super safe. Nobody's ever going to know who really owns it or how much of it is or how much there is. And so when you had the Panama Papers come out a couple of years ago, yeah, you had money in Panama and you had money in the Grand Caymans and whatever. But billions and billions and billions of dollars of that money was parked in South Dakota in a building, in a trust building on Main Street, or pardon me, on Phillips Avenue in Sioux Falls, next to the diner. And billions and billions and billions of dollars held by international politicians and celebrities, the most powerful people in the world, are sitting in that old Kresge Five and Dime on Phillips Avenue in Sioux Falls.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, I do want to be clear that the way that the credit cards and financial industry
Mhm.
was described, um, although very likely accurate, not presented by somebody who's fond of the
Well, yeah. There are certainly counter arguments.
um but anyway, the so I just want to make that clear.
Yes.
There's actually I'll have to check on this. We'll put it in the show notes. There's a new book that's come out. I'm hoping to read it by name's escaping me right now. But yeah, I'll put it in the show notes.
Mm.
And the reason that I know all about this in South Dakota is because I went to a presentation of his.
Oh,
Sean Vanatta, he's one of the authors, one of the two authors, and where he went into great detail about that major change in South Dakota,
mhm.
about how that affected the national banking system,
Yes.
actually. And so yeah, so if you're getting a lot of when you get your credit card bill, there's a good chance that the address is going to be somewhere in South Dakota.
Yeah, there's a very good chance. I had a friend of mine call me the other day and she said, it's really fascinating. I got this new credit card and it was issued out of South Dakota. And I said, well, that's because they can charge you a higher interest rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
No, and of course, the United States, and other, two states that get a lot of criticism for their financial laws, aside from South Dakota, are Nevada
Mhm.
and Delaware,
Yes.
because of the way that they can set up corporations. So anyway, it's just interesting to note that one union does not mean one banking system or
Oh,
one financial system.
absolutely not.
Okay, so let's get back into the politics of it.
Mhm.
So South Dakota has a lot of bankers,
Mhm.
right? A lot of insurance people,
Yes.
which makes sense. You got a lot of farmers, you need a lot of insurance people.
Mhm.
And especially you've got a big banking industry, you need a lot of insurance
Mhm.
people too. And then a lot of lawyers, which you know, you're gonna
Yeah.
need too.
Mhm.
So that tends to characterize this, let's call it the establishment professional wing
Mhm.
of the Republican Party in South Dakota. Can you give me a few examples of people who were from that wing that maybe the audience might know? I mean, this is, obviously South Dakota is a small place. It doesn't always register nationally, but there are some prominent figures that have
Oh,
registered.
oh, absolutely. And you see members of South Dakota's congressional delegation. I think Dusty Johnson would serve as an excellent example of this. He's currently South Dakota's member of the House of Representatives. South Dakota only has one, and it's Dusty Johnson. He's running for governor in this next upcoming gubernatorial primary. But Dusty Johnson is always a man who's sort of flitted in and out of that Republican gentry or that Republican professional class, who's done a bunch of work for utilities and served on the PUC, and then he worked in state government on the political end, and then he got into politics and went to the House of Representatives. But Dusty Johnson is always somebody who's been deeply, deeply affiliated with South Dakota's professional educated wing, and it's caused him a lot of political problems. Where the more radical, shall we say, wing of the Republican Party sees this, and they've levied some pretty scary primary challenges against him. Not in 2024, but in 2022, he only got about 60% of the vote in that Republican primary. And again, the divide was stark. He was running against a state senator from West River, and the state senator from West River carried West River, but Dusty Johnson carried East River and particularly Sioux Falls.
So there is this, and it's not just East. So, yeah, so there is this divide that we've talked about between West River and East River. But let me ask a little bit about the divide between Sioux Falls and the rest of East River.
Oh, yeah. There is Sioux Falls is resented, I would say, by people.
Like only a small city in a small state can be.
Oh, absolutely. By people both West River and East River who don't live in Sioux Falls, because it is a growing economic powerhouse, and so much of the rest of the state is shrinking. Not only West River, though you do see population declines there pretty heavily, but also East River in places like Edmonds and Campbell County, in north central South Dakota, and then places like Douglas County, which is near the river, all across eastern South Dakota in these, farming towns, the population's declining. Um, and then when you look at Sioux Falls and you see a population that's exploding and an economy that's exploding.
Exploding relatively.
No, exploding by even like Lincoln County, South Dakota, which is just to the south of South Dakota, is one of the counties with the 10 largest population gains by percent in the United States of America.
Wow.
When I say exploding, I genuinely mean exploding. And so when you look at that, there's a natural resentment there that like the place I'm living is dying. And these people 50, 75 miles away, who also, by the by, hold your mortgage, and you have to go there to buy clothes, and you have to go there to buy anything other than staple groceries or to bring your kid to the doctor. These people are having this financial boondoggle. It's a natural resentment.
Right. And of course, the people who live in Sioux Falls probably don't appear to care much about how people are doing in the rural parts of the county. And I know that's not true, but from the perception of somebody in the rural parts of the state who are ultra sensitive to this,
yes,
it would be very easy to accidentally offend somebody.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So, in the 2022 primary, Dusty Johnson's running Republican Gentry, and he narrowly escapes.
Yes.
He was in a statewide race.
Yes.
Right? He's so excited by that, he's running for governor again.
Yeah.
Does he stand a chance?
That's a fascinating question. So the Republican primary for governor in South Dakota is incredibly crowded right now. You have Dusty Johnson, of course, and then you have, and he's on the more establishment wing. And then you have John Hanson, who is the current Speaker of the South Dakota House of Representatives, and he's far on the MAGA wing. In particularly, there have been a few statewide ballot measures concerning abortion, and he has been on the pro-birth side of all of those, really leading the way. And then you have this guy named Toby Doden, who is a crypto millionaire out of Aberdeen, South Dakota, who has bankrolled the furthest of the right-wing primary challengers, a bunch of whom won. And also, there's a current controversy in South Dakota over ethanol pipelines and the eminent domain, or pardon me, not ethanol, well, ethanol pipelines in a roundabout way. And the use of eminent domain for them. They wanted to run this Iowa company. There's nothing South Dakota hates more than Iowa and Iowa companies. And this Iowa company wanted to run a carbon capture pipeline through South Dakota. And in order to do that, they were going to have to use eminent domain on a bunch of farmland to run the pipeline under it. And the farmers said, no, it might be bad for my soil. I don't like the Green New Deal carbon capture. You're not going to take my land, that sort of stuff. And they had a case. Like, it was eminent domain for private gain, and that's always controversial. And so there was a huge split amongst the Republican Party where the professional class said this is economic development. This is going to be good for South Dakota's overall economy. We're totally for this. And the South Dakota farming class said, that's my land that you want to take for the private gain of this Iowa company. We're not going to stand for it. And they created a massive grassroots, genuinely grassroots political movement that unseated over a dozen, I think it was, incumbent state legislators in the most recent primary election. And including like members who had been in the South Dakota state legislature since the 1990s in various capacities. And so you have this massive upswing in power for that populist part of the Republican Party. And Toby Doden, who's running in the Republican primary, bankrolled a lot of that. He has very fringe political views, but it's a question of whether John Hanson and Toby Doden will split that more right-wing vote and allow Dusty Johnson to sort of sneak through, or whether either Hanson or Doden can sort of coalesce that wing of the party. And then the other X factor is the incumbent governor of South Dakota is this West River rancher named Larry Roden, who is Kristi Noem's lieutenant governor. And then when Kristi Noem moved to Washington, he got the job. And it's sort of uncertain at this point whether Larry Roden's going to run for governor. He's said that he has, and then he said that he hasn't, and then more recently he said, yes, I'm going to. But some people sort of question how strongly he feels about that. And so the question becomes, does Larry Roden really go for it? Or is he eventually going to sit back and sort of coalesce behind Dusty Johnson? And so those are the big factors, is can John Hanson and Toby Doden compromise? And is Larry Roden really, really running for governor? Or is he saying he's running for governor right now as sort of a bargaining position?
Interesting. Very interesting. But you would assume that if he is going to drop out, he would back Dusty Johnson.
That's what you would assume, because he comes from West River, but he's one of those figures. He had been in the legislature forever.
Sure.
Very much been in leadership, very much an establishment Republican apparatchik, you could
Fair
say.
enough. And I mean, just because somebody's from West River and the ranching group, I'm sure there's various gradations there.
Oh,
as
absolutely.
well. And so, we only have an hour, so we can't, I really want to deeply dive into that. But I want to bring us, so, I mean, I think that's a really neat encapsulation. One last question, I guess.
Yeah.
The actual state politics.
Uh-huh.
Where is the momentum of the Republican caucus?
The momentum of the Republican caucus is towards that more populist right-wing group and against the Sioux Falls establishment class. The big problem the Sioux Falls professional class has is that their base of support comes primarily from Sioux Falls. And Sioux Falls is the only place in the state that's becoming more democratic.
Well, people are moving there.
People are moving there, and the population is relatively well educated and relatively well off. And so you do have, certainly not to the degree that you have in the suburbs of other cities, but relative to South Dakota, Sioux Falls is becoming a more democratic place. And so Democrats can elect state legislators out of Sioux Falls in a way that they can't in any other part of the state. And so if you're an establishment Republican thinking, I need, 50% at least of the South Dakota Republican Legislative Caucus, where am I going to get these legislators? You've got a mounting problem because in theory you would be getting the legislators out of Sioux Falls, but you've got to run a real race in the general against a Democrat. That, some of the times you're going to win, but some of the times you're going to lose. And that's not a problem that the agrarian populist, you're not like, no, a Democrat's not going to win out of Huron or out of Condé or out of Bone Steel or West River out of Harding County. Like Democrats just can't win those.
Right. And so if
seats.
you're the establishment Republican in Sioux Falls, you can't triangulate both directions.
No.
You can only triangulate one
Yeah,
direction.
you've got enemies coming for both, and you just can't win a two-front war.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. Great. That's fantastic. And I'm sure that's more South Dakota political analysis than has been offered anywhere in a very outside of South Dakota
Outside of South Dakota,
in a long time.
yeah, there are a couple of okay to decent South Dakota political blogs, but that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we might not be number one, but we might be better than number 5.
We are certainly better. We are certainly in the top 5.
Okay.
Yeah, like I'm a fan of the Dakota Free Press, and the South Dakota Searchlight does a good job, and Sioux Falls Live does a good job, and the Dakota Scout has their moments, but we're up there, especially in terms of podcasts.
Interesting. So, all right, I want to pivot. I want to go a little historical, and I want to go national. South Dakota.
Okay.
South Dakota, despite being a highly, what I may have argued is the most Republican state.
Yeah.
And typically smaller states don't have major national presences. However, South Dakota does have a long history of producing very prominent national figures.
Absolutely.
And interestingly, not all of them are Republicans.
No, in fact, South Dakota, arguably the two most prominent South Dakotans in American political history, are very liberal Democrats.
Which is remarkable to me.
Yep. Hubert Humphrey and George McGovern, proud South Dakotans.
Hubert Humphrey, Minnesotan.
He was born in South Dakota.
Oh, was he? Oh, okay.
He was born and raised in a small town near Huron, South Dakota.
Interesting.
And then he moved to Minnesota to jumpstart his political career.
I'd assumed you were talking about Tom Daschle.
Well, Tom Daschle, also from, my mom worked for Tom Daschle, also from South Dakota.
Not as liberal.
Not as liberal. And he never was a nominee. So,
sure, but he was Senate leader.
Yeah, very, very powerful guy. I won't quibble with you about the power of Tom Daschle. But yeah, South Dakota has had a shocking and really incongruous hold over the National Democratic Party in a really weird way.
Right, despite never yet. So what's interesting here is we have a guy like Tom Daschle and George McGovern, and there's one other whose name escapes me, who was a longtime Democratic senator.
Tim Johnson.
There we go. You've got these 3 long-serving Democratic senators that have to win statewide races.
Yeah.
In a state that no other Democrats could win a statewide race in.
Nope.
So what does that tell us about the Democrats in South Dakota? They were able to win races at some point.
There was, and reasonable people can disagree reasonably about the effectiveness of the state Democratic Party today. Certainly, there have been some recent incidents in the state Democratic Party that
do tell.
They're ineffective leadership, and there was a schism over the party chair here recently. It's just been a mess. It's been a disorganized mess, and a great amount of infighting. It's that classic case where the less and less power a group of people have, the more and more they fight over the little power they have left.
Smaller the cage, the fiercer the rat.
Absolutely. But in years previously, and a lot of this goes back to George McGovern, where in the 1950s, starting there, the South Dakota Democratic Party was a non-entity. The South Dakota Democratic Party held 0 seats in the state house, and I think, or pardon me, 0 seats in the state senate and 2 in the state house. And so they were just nothing. And then George McGovern is persuaded to give up his teaching job at Dakota Wesleyan University and go become the full-time executive director of the South Dakota Democratic Party. And he goes around the state, um, and and this can only happen in a state as small as South Dakota, but through basically his sheer force of personality and will, reconstitutes the state Democratic Party. He'll drive in to a county or a city with no Democratic presence, with no county party or county chairman, and he'll basically just start knocking on doors and talking to people and hoping to find closet Democrats. And after he did that for enough years, he almost single-handedly, with the help of certainly a number of other people, but he was the leader, rebuilt the state Democratic Party system and functions. And so without George, and then he was able to capitalize on all of those personal relationships to win election to first the House and then the Senate. And so what you have to realize with the South Dakota Democratic Party is for a very long time, it was more than the Republican Party connected to uh, everyday South Dakotans because it had nothing to lose. And so it was just willing to send a person out to the small town, middle of nowhere to go talk to everybody. My grandpa worked for another Democratic South Dakota Senator, Jim Aberesk. And my grandpa's job was Jim Aberesk had this flatbed truck when he was running for House the first time, and they drive into this small town in West River, South Dakota, and my grandpa would get on the megaphone and he'd say, Jim Aberesk is going to give a speech on Main Street in 10 minutes. And the truck would just drive up and down every street in town, and my grandpa would say that. And then 10 minutes later, because it only took 10 minutes to drive through the town, 10 minutes later, Jim Aberesk would give a speech on Main Street to 30 or 40 people, of whom 10 were there really just to throw tomatoes. But then he could net maybe 10 to 15 votes. And then they do it in the next town, and then they do it in the next town. And that's how they rebuilt the South Dakota Democratic Party.
That's really fascinating. And I mean, I love that story because that is how politics actually operates.
Mhm.
That is how organizational politics actually works.
Yep.
And if you want to, having worked on campaigns myself in areas that are very, very hostile,
Mhm.
um, reverse hostile to the type of campaigns you're talking
Yeah.
about, um, the power of just personal connections, and you just go door to door and you meet people,
Mhm.
and like it's dull and tedious, and it takes so much time, and it is the furthest thing from sexy politics.
Oh, it couldn't be less glamorous.
But it is the best way still to build an organization.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so what you're suggesting is that George McGovern goes across the whole state, tries to meet every South Dakotan,
More or less. Yeah.
asks them, said, "Hey, listen, I'm a Democrat, but you know, I'm not here to tell you about the Democratic
Yeah.
Party.
Mhm.
I'm here to know about you.
Yes, absolutely.
What are your concerns, and how is
Mhm.
the Republican Party not meeting your concerns?"
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you can use that, and people are going to respond to that.
Yeah.
Right? If I come to your door and I say, "Hey, I'm from the Marxist-Leninist Party or something,"
Mhm.
it doesn't matter what party you're coming from,
Yeah.
a party you might really disagree with, but I say, "I just wanna hear about what your problems are."
Yeah. Well, you'd be surprised. My grandpa likes telling this story. When he was working for Jim Aberesk, he was sent up to Campbell County, South Dakota, which was in the extreme, like north central South Dakota, very, very rural, very Republican. And he was sent to talk to the party chair there. And he goes, meets the party chair. They're talking, goes into the party chair's house, and there's a picture of Mao Zedong on the wall. And so my grandpa points at it and he says, "What's up with that?" And the party chair of the Campbell County Democratic Party, this is in like 1973, says, "Oh, I'm a Maoist." And that was how the South Dakota Democratic Party had been depleted, was the chair of the county party was a Maoist.
Yeah, that's really not smart.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
I'm assuming that Mao Zedong thought is not very popular among the county ranchers.
It's not, and it wasn't then. And I would like to state for the record that that individual is no longer the chair of the Campbell County Democratic Party. But like that's how few Democrats there are.
Well, that gives you an idea. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing in a party that has very little power.
Mhm.
Is that the people who are still there are bizarre,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, but also maybe, well, we'll leave it at bizarre.
Yeah. Mhm.
But anyway, back to the, uh, of course, the South Dakota also currently has a very powerful Senate leader
Yes.
who is not a Democrat.
No, Senator Thune is not a Democrat.
Yeah. So can we talk a little bit about Senator Thune
Certainly.
and and how does he fit into the rest of the South Dakota Republican Party?
Yeah. So Senator John Thune, who's currently the Senate Majority Leader, he grew up in Murdo, South Dakota. That's West River. Very, very small town. And then he went to college, comes back, and he, joins the state legislature and becomes prominent. Goes to the House of Representatives, and then he eventually challenges Tim Johnson, who we previously discussed.
Who is the Democratic
So
senator?
he was a Democratic senator.
And he was like I mean, I'm trying to remember. Did Johnson outlast Daschle?
Johnson did outlast Daschle,
Right. Okay.
which is integral to the story. But Tim Johnson had been a figure in South Dakota politics for decades. He was well known. But then this is in I forget if this was in 2000 or 2002. John Thune challenges Tim Johnson. And so you have this race between two of the most prominent South Dakota political figures, and Tim Johnson wins by just over 500 votes out of the reservation. Tim Johnson had a much better turnout campaign on South Dakota reservations and much better relationships with South Dakota Native American leaders. And from that, he's able to eke out 500 votes on the reservation, and he beats John Thune for the Senate. And so then John Thune comes back 2 years later and challenges Tom Daschle. And Tom Daschle at this point is the leader of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And now this is the time when it was a 50-50 split in the Senate, and then Jim Jeffords switches parties. So Tom Daschle was minority leader, majority leader, minority.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't remember exactly where he stood.
It keeps flip-flopping. But one of the most powerful figures in national politics, and John Thune is challenging him. And it is an incredibly close, incredibly hard-fought race. But then John Thune beats him. And John Thune takes out the sitting Democratic leader, something that hadn't been done since, I think it was Ernest McFarland of Arizona, who was the last Senate leader to have been beat. It was either him or Scott Lucas in Illinois. And so then John Thune goes to the Senate, and he becomes a very powerful figure, not only in South Dakota politics, but in senatorial politics, to the extent that in 2012 and 2008, and to a lesser extent 2016, he's openly discussed as a candidate for president or vice president amongst the people who know in Washington. And he never runs, but he's openly discussed, becomes very powerful, very close to Mitch McConnell. And in South Dakota, he is very powerful, but I will say that when you're that powerful in the United States Senate, you're just not able to be as involved in South Dakota politics. You're not able to be as involved in the primary race for District 17 state House members. And so there is certainly a disconnect between the most powerful member of the South Dakota Republican Party and the people in the South Dakota Republican Party who actually do all of the work.
Sure. I mean, that's very common that, you'll see somebody who is this highly prominent figure and they're almost independent
Yes.
of the party. They're their own thing. They've got their own orbit.
Mhm.
There's, and I'm sure Kentuckians could tell you the same thing about Mitch McConnell.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Or, yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
or the New York Democratic Party could tell you about Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the
Absolutely.
same.
Mhm. It's just a different level of power.
It's more important for Schumer to be at an election in California than it is
Uh-huh.
for him to be raising money for you
in
running in the
in
fourth.
Schenectady
Yeah,
or
exactly.
whatever. Yeah, it just is. It's just not effective politics for John Thune to be fundraising in Brookings on the weekend. It's just not. And so you have John Thune creates this really odd power vacuum in being a absentee leader in the South Dakota Republican Party that various figures have tried and sort of failed to fill over the years.
Does his word carry?
His word carries certainly, like, you're going to do what John Thune tells you to do. It's just a matter of, is what you're doing important enough for John Thune to care? And the answer is usually no, because also, like, John Thune's not losing a primary in a way.
Okay, that was going to be my next
Mhm.
question.
Like John Thune, and I'm not saying that there's no dissatisfaction with him amongst particularly that very right wing part of the South Dakota Democratic Party or Republican Party, pardon me. But they don't have enough power to oust John Thune, especially given the resources and the money that John Thune can bring to bear. They just don't have that power.
So can I ask? I'm going to ask a question that only came to me in this conversation. John Thune's West River, right?
He grew up West River. Now he's
Sure, but
East River, but
yeah,
originally West River. Yeah.
is it an easier path to statewide dominance to come out of West River?
That's an interesting question because there have been quite a few prominent West River political figures. Larry Roden's from West River. If you go back into South Dakota political history, you have figures like Walter Dale Miller, who is the only other governor, or one of the few other governors in South Dakota history to come from the lieutenant governorship. And so you do have prominent South or West River political figures, but they're always sort of second banana. Uh, I think it's telling that both Miller and Roden originally came from the lieutenant governorship and then became governor.
Interesting. Okay.
And so you do have a number of prominent, like it's sort of old hat. If you're a gubernatorial candidate, almost invariably you're from East River. So then you're going to pick somebody from West River to be your LG nominee.
Interesting.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. Okay, so we've made it this far into the South Dakota deep dive of
Yeah.
politics, which is I'm just checking here, 52 minutes.
Yes.
And we have not discussed the elephant in the room.
We have not discussed Kristi Noem.
No.
No. Where to start?
Okay, we're gonna try to keep this relatively quick because Kristi Noem, there's a lot to know about Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem is sort of all-encompassing.
Okay, so where does Kristi Noem come from in South Dakota?
Kristi Noem comes from Hamlin County, which is about as East River as you can be, actually. She does. First myth I would like to dispel about Kristi Noem: she does not come from a ranch. She comes from South Dakota farming country, and so she gets her start again in the legislature, and then she runs. This is in 2014 against South Dakota's then Democratic congressional representative, Stephanie Herseth, or pardon me, not 2014, 2010, against South Dakota's then Democratic congressional representative, Stephanie Herseth Sandlin. Representative Herseth came from a storied Democratic family. Her granddad was governor. Her dad ran for governor and just about won. And so she's as close as you can get to Democratic South Dakota political royalty. And Kristi Noem runs against her. And Representative Herseth, of course, 2010 was a bloodbath, particularly for rural Democrats across the country. Representative Herseth loses. And that's how Kristi Noem gets on the scenes. And originally, and granted, I was pretty young, but the sense I get was that she wasn't exactly prominent on the national stage initially. But then come 2018, she's been in the House for 8 years.
And being in the House when you're from South Dakota is difficult. I mean, you're running every 2 years a statewide campaign because there's only one district.
You're running in like South Dakota, population-wise, it's small, but geographically, it's massive. It's 8-hour drive from east to west, and so like you've got so much ground to cover. And Kristi Noem runs for governor in 2018 against Marty Jackley, who at that point was the South Dakota Attorney General and is the Attorney General again today.
So Marty Jackley, Republican.
Marty Jackley, Republican. And so they run in the primary. There's a brief interlude in the Attorney Generalship in South Dakota filled by this guy named Jason Ravnsborg. That's a different story, and you'll have to bring me back to talk about that because that's a great story, but that's a different story. But in any event, Noem and Jackley run against one another. And it's an incredibly bitter race. It's incredibly contentious. And Kristi Noem beats Marty Jackley. And Marty Jackley, who's wanted to be governor his whole life. Kristi Noem beats Marty Jackley by the skin of her teeth. It's so close. And then she gets into a general against a Democrat named Billy Sutton, who's a state senator from rural South Dakota, one of the last Democratic state senators from rural South Dakota. He used to be a rodeo cowboy. Billy Sutton comes from a ranch, and then he had a rodeo accident and he becomes paralyzed. And he is in a wheelchair. And so he is the phenomenal South Dakota Democratic candidate for governor. In 2018, an incredibly Democratic year. And the thing of it is, even people in the South Dakota Republican Party don't like Kristi Noem. She's not well.
I mean, I think you're going to get that in any party where you've got like she's been in Congress for 6 years, and you're going to especially and this is where it comes back to the running a statewide race every 2 years. What's really hard about this is that in order to do that, you're going to have to lean on people.
Oh, yes.
You are going to have to demand things of people.
Yes.
You're going to have to really work really hard, but you can just not physically be in Washington and also pound that many doors that you need to do to win.
Absolutely.
So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to be borderline abusive to organizational people, and that's totally natural.
Yep.
This is why, again, I don't think like I take a look at the 5 or 6 states where it's a statewide, right, congressional race.
Yeah.
And I think that's the worst job in the world.
There's a reason why representatives to the House from South Dakota usually top out at about 8 years. After 8 years, they're running for something else, or they're just done.
You're either exhausted or you have worn out every bit of political capital you ever had. Because you just can't. John Thune is different.
Yes.
It's every 6 years.
It's every 6.
And on top of that, he's obviously, but even if he was just an ordinary senator, it's only every 6 years.
Yes.
And it's just different.
Yes.
It's not every 2 years. You're not the obvious target. And so regardless of how people would feel about her normally or ordinarily, everybody in that position is going to be hated.
Oh, absolutely. And it speaks to Governor Noem's sort of leadership style, I would say, where there's sort of like 2 leadership styles amongst prominent South Dakota Republicans, where you have John Thune is sort of his own entity, but he also falls into the camp with Mike Rounds, who's the state's other senator, and former Governor Dennis Dugard, where they're Republicans, but they're just really nice guys. And they're like not abrasive, and they're just, down to earth people.
It's called a good old boy.
A good old boy. And
which has its own possible problems.
On the other hand, Kristi Noem really harkens back. I discussed William Janklow, Governor Janklow, who's governor for 16 years. And when I say he was governor, he was governor. He ran the state. You did what Bill Janklow told you to do. And Kristi Noem comes from that Bill Janklow school of South Dakota Republican politics where she's in charge. And like it or not, you do what Kristi Noem says, and that's it. And so, like, that created amongst the South Dakota Republican Party, um, people just don't like her. And so in that 2018 gubernatorial election, like in June, July, as late as August, Kristi Noem was losing that election to Billy Sutton, the Democrat, straight up losing that election in public and private polling. And in order to win that race, she had to spend a whole bunch of money, more money than a Republican should ever have to spend in South Dakota. She had to twist the arms of the South Dakota establishment banker class to not defect to Billy Sutton's camp. And she had to work. She had to work in order to win that race. And she only ends up winning by 3.4%.
That's really impressive, actually. She managed to pull that off.
Yeah. And she like,
And then come back to work. She worked.
And like, credit where credit's due. She got it done. But there is a reason why Kristi Noem moved away from South Dakota, I believe. And that is because, like, going forward, she was governor. She would have been termed out in this upcoming cycle. And then what is she supposed to do? She's not. I mean, she wasn't going to go back to the House. Is she supposed to challenge an incumbent senator?
Right. And she wouldn't have had the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that leadership style there's an expiry date on it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's always an expiry date on it.
Even like Bill Janklow, governor for 16 years, an incredibly successful governor from a policy standpoint. It expired on him too.
Right. And one that didn't have the national profile to distract them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing where South Dakotans really don't like when people go national on them. They didn't like that. George McGovern ended up losing his final Senate race, and a large part of it was because he went national at the end. And that was a problem Tom Daschle had, and that is a problem that Kristi Noem has, where she's just not attuned.
And it's a problem that Thune might have.
And it's a problem Thune has to a certain extent, but Thune has always been a competent enough, or a savvy enough politician, I would say, to sort of overcome that. And I would say for Kristi Noem, an element of it is probably ingrained sexism, where like John Thune is able to get away with things, or certain absenteeism that Kristi Noem's just not allowed to get away with. And then part of it is the difference between being a senator and a governor. Like as a senator, some of that happens naturally. As a governor, in any state, but it's true in South Dakota too, like people want your governor there.
Sure. Big thing.
Yes.
And this is something, if anybody's listening to this in a small state and wants to be governor because they want national profile, it's a bad idea.
Oh yeah, run for anything else.
Right. I used to work in Alberta politics in Canada, and we had a premier, which is the equivalent of governor. And she came out of the UN. Her CV was unbelievable.
Immaculate.
Right. Unbelievable. And her base was Calgary. She'd come out like she was not some person who just came back to Alberta. She'd always kind of been part of Alberta. But she wanted to be premier so she could go abroad and have a retinue. Right. And I've always told people who are interested in being leaders of small states, you know what? Pick the least attractive town in your state.
Yep.
At the worst time of year. And you have to prefer that to DC.
Yes. Absolutely.
You have to rather be there than be in DC.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a really cheap and easy political victory to do that.
Absolutely.
Like, you know what? It's the middle of winter. And I don't know, where's the worst winter in South Dakota?
The worst winter in South Dakota is in Summit, South Dakota. It's jokingly referred to as the Bermuda Triangle of South Dakota, where it's, in like the weather around Summit is always weird and it's never good.
And you know what? You know what it wouldn't cost very much if you want to be a politician? Showing up there on the worst day of the year.
You show up to Summit on January 15th. January is always miserable back home. If you're in Summit at the Summit Methodist Church or whatever on January 15th, you can win re-election.
Yeah. But you have to be there.
You don't
have to be there every year, but every couple of years.
Every couple of years. you've got to be in Summit, and that's just
And not in the middle of summer.
not in the middle of summer, and Kristi Noem's South Dakotans can sense that Kristi Noem just won't do that.
Well, I mean, now it's hard. She's a cabinet secretary. But yeah, you get that. And here's the thing, it's easy to get too big for your britches, right? And it's easy to get that taste of national power.
Yeah.
And then, I'm going to go back to my state and I'm going to use that as a power base for more national power. And it very rarely works out that way.
And the problem, that might work other places, but it doesn't work in South Dakota.
It doesn't work other places.
Where South Dakota has no national power to be had. Where you might be able to swing that in Iowa, because like the Iowa caucuses are something to be desired, or victory in them. But like, what are you gaining?
Everybody in Iowa is as sensitive as the people in South Dakota.
That's true.
Everybody in Arkansas is as sensitive as the people in South Dakota. Everybody in Vermont is as sensitive as the people of South Dakota. They know when you're playing national games at their expense. So. Anyway, Jack, I think that was a lot of fun.
Yes,
I enjoyed
absolutely.
that conversation. And we'll do it again soon. And if not on South Dakota, maybe you should join in with me and we bring in somebody from different states and we keep doing this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I love learning about the minutia of various states. It's fascinating.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.